Before we begin, take a deep breath and let the noise of the day slowly fade. Cue, unclench your jaw, soften your eyes, and let the weight of modern life melt away. Tonight, we're not chasing action or drama. We're wandering into the forgotten corridors of boring history, where medieval echoes linger and dark tales unfold like fading ink on parchment. Welcome to Midnight Sleepless, a resting place for tired minds, where the Middle Ages, ancient empires, and strange, dark history. Stories drift by like soft clouds. Here, knights, castles, and quiet empires return, not with a roar, but with a whisper. Let me know in the comments, where in the world are you listening from, and what time is it there? And if you enjoy these slow, sleepy journeys through medieval times, boring facts, and forgotten worlds, a gentle tap on the subscribe button helps keep this calm storytelling alive. Now, let the story begin. Dawn arrives not in brightness, but in breath along. Low exhale across the steppe, cold and invisible. It stirs the woolen walls of the yurt like a ghost, testing the seams for weakness. The wind is not cruel, but familiar. It is old. It has walked these lands long before the hooves of horses and long after the bones of warriors were folded into the soil. Inside the yurt, life stirs before the sun breaks the sky. The fire is not yet lit, but the coals are alive, sleeping, not dead. Altai, the eldest of the household, shifts beneath her heavy felt blanket. Her hair, streaked with silver like the tail of a comet, is already tied in a low knot. She sleeps lightly, like all who live with the wind. Her ears catch the movements of the youngest goat, bleeding just outside the entrance flap. A fox must have passed too close. Altai's hand reaches for the flint and steel by instinct. She does not yawn. Instead, she pulls herself up with the calm efficiency of someone who has done this every day of her life. Her fingers, though weathered, move with a kind of reverence as she stokes the ash and brings flame to dried dung stacked carefully in the clay hearth. The fire crackles to life, a small defiance against the sprawling cold that lies just beyond the yurt's threshold. As the smoke begins its lazy spiral upward through the smoke hole, Altai sings a low, not a song, but a tone to let the others know she is awake. It is not expected, but it is tradition. Her daughter-in-law Sulan stirs next. Younger, but no less practiced, Sulan folds her bedding in silence and ties it into a compact bundle. In a yurt, space is sacred. Every object has its place, and every movement is measured. The two women move like shadows around each other. Sulan checks the leather water bag near the door. It is half full. She steps out into the morning, her fur-lined boots crunching the frost-hardened earth. She moves toward the stream where a skin bucket waits, eyes scanning the horizon out of habit. Danger rarely announces itself loudly on the steppe. Inside, Altai prepares the morning tea. Not just for drinking, but for waking. The yurt itself. The first boiling of salted milk tea is poured into a small wooden bowl and placed near the hearth's edge, not for the living, but for the ancestors. A wisp of steam rises and joins the smoke above. The Mongol way does not forget the dead. They ride still, somewhere just beyond the edge of the known world. By now, the young boy steamer and Beitar awake. They do not speak yet. That too is part of the rhythm. Their tasks are many, but none are rushed. I too dresses first, pulling on a thick woolen dill with clumsy fingers, his hair sticking out in a dozen directions. His older brother, Timur, laughs, but helps him silently, looping the sash around Bata's waist and tightening it with a brother's gentleness. As Sulan returns with water sloshing softly in the bucket, she glances at her sons and smiles. They remind her of her own brothers, once small and serious, now scattered across the steppe like seeds in wind. She sets the bucket down and begins slicing dried mutton from a hanging strip beside the door. Tough as bark but nourishing. Breakfast will be sagen, ID white food, yogurt, curds, dried cheese, and milk tea thickened with butter. Altai hums again, this time a fragment of an old tale. Baitu listens with wide eyes. He loves stories more than food. He asks, quietly, will you tell the one about the eagle? Altai nods. But later, not before the livestock are checked, not before the sun has kissed the grasslands and lifted the frost from the tent ropes, Timur steps outside. His task is to check the hobbled horses. Their breath clouds the morning air like smoke signals. He pats the flank of the bay mare, their best steed, and checks her hooves for ice. The horses are patient, even noble, but they carry the mood of the wind. He sings a short tune under his breath, something the old men say calms them. Perhaps it does. Behind the yurt, Sulin milks the goats. The warm liquid steams in the copper pail, a blessing in the cold air. She hums softly too, the tune echoing Elties but drifting differently like a branch from the same tree. Each woman holds her own tone, her own thread in the fabric of morning dot. Inside, Batu helps arrange the food bowls. His hands tremble with the effort not to spill. Kati corrects him without speaking, just a raised eyebrow. He adjusts. The tea is poured. The family gathers on low cushions in a half circle. Tiva. No one eats until the first sip is offered to the heir. Another nod to the precip. Today, I just know it's gonna be a really good day. Because I'm gonna start out my Sith. Because I'm gonna start out my mice. My eyes, my mice said. The ciclet is great teth. I win. Eth. A. May. 1. A. S. S. E. S. S. A. E. As. As. X. As. As. Me. As. Ad. Ag. As. I. Ag. Is. Ad. Ag. And I. Unseen, the remembered, Altai finally speaks. The eagle flew too close to the sun. She says, voice slow and shaped like worn stone. But it returned, burnt, but wise, Bata beams. He loves that story, though he barely understands it. As they eat, the silence is companionable. The fire pops gently. The walls of the yurt flicker with shadows. Smoke, meat. Wool form a tapestry older than any written word. The morning ritual is not just for sustenance. It is a preservation of rhythm, a language spoken through gesture, routine, scent, and song. The men will ride later. They will scout or hunt. The women will dry curds, spin wool, and mend saddle straps. The boys would gather dung, chase the goats, and race each other with wooden swords. But for now, this hour belongs to the hearth and the breath of morning outside. The horizon begins to blush. The sun, reluctant and golden, pushes against the sky's edge. The yurt stands like a drum on the land taut, resonant, alive. Every stitch of felt, every carved spoon, every smooth stone in the hearth bears the memory of those who shaped them. Even the silence speaks. The wind never stopped on the Mongolian steppe. It rolled like a living thing, howling, whispering, sometimes singing, sweeping across the open plains and tugging at the edges of the round felt tent that little Alton called home. He was 10. Winter's old now, and each year his bones remembered the cold better. But today was special. Today his father would teach him how to light the fire. The sun had barely begun to spill over the horizon, casting long golden fingers through the cracks in the yurt's felt covering. The thick wool smelled of smoke, animals, and earth. It was both a shelter and a world unto itself. The yurtorger, as his people called, it was more than fabric and poles. It was family. It was survival. It was legacy. Outside, snow blanketed the earth like silence made visible. The steppes stretched endlessly, empty to the eye, but full of invisible life. Herds of goats and sheep huddled against each other for warmth. Horses stomping the frozen earth, and distant wolves watching from ridges. Alton stirred under layers of furze fox, wolf, marmotal stitched together by his grandmother's hands. She had died the previous winter, but her fur blankets were still the warmest thing they owned. Her memory lingered in the scent of cured hide and the neat pattern of blue thread she always stitched along the edges. His father, Apata, sat cross-legged, near the center of the gare, the hearthstone glowing faintly before him. A blackened pot hung above the embers, steaming gently with milk tea. Beta's thick beard was dusted with frost, but his eyes sparkled with the same fire that licked it. "The logs. You ready, son?" Batu asked, his voice deep like thunder in the mountains. Alton nodded. "Then come, learn what every man must know, how fire lives and how we feed it." The spirit of the fire on the steppe. Fire was sacred. Not just warmth, not just cooking fire, was a spirit, a keeper of the home. It was never to be disrespected. You never spit in it, you never burned bones in it, and you always offered it the first sip of your drink in winter. Alton approached with reverence. He knelt beside his father, watching as Bateau broke apart dried dung paddies field, collected and pressed in summer when the herds grazed high in the hills. Firewood was scarce out here. Trees did not grow where the wind ruled. With careful hands, Batu showed him how to stack the dung. Layer it with thin slivers of dry grass, then add a puff of wool felt shorn from their own sheep and dried by the hearth for days. "Felt is our second skin," Batu said. "It clothes us, covers our home, even feeds the fire. We are nothing without it." Alton lit the tinder with a flint spark, and the fire caught a small flicker that grew into warmth. For the first time, he felt power in his hands. They had fed the home's spirit. "Bat," you clapped a strong hand on his shoulder. "You've done well. Your mother will have warm tea when she wakes. A home woven from wind the yurt breathed with them. Its wooden frame, made from pliant willow poles, bent but did not break against the wind. The thick felt, pressed from sheep's wool and soaked in smoke and oil, wrapped them like a second womb. In summer, the felt was peeled back to let in air. In winter, it was doubled, sometimes tripled, and furs were hung across the door. Even the floor was lined with pelts. Fire warmed the space, and body heat sealed it. Alton's mother, Oyuntia, rose later that morning. Her long black hair was braided with blue thread, the color of the eternal sky, worshipped by their people. She rubbed her hands before the fire and smiled at her son. "You lit it, didn't you?" He nodded proudly. She poured him a cup of milk tea, salty and rich, and handed him a chunk of dried cheese. As he chewed, she ran her hands over the stitching of a new pair of fur boots she was making. Winter was long, and their youngest baby, Surin, would need them soon. Every stitch mattered. Every hide had its story. "That one," she said, pointing at the fox fur near the door, "came from the hunt your father made the day you were born. A red fox, clever and fast, he caught in near the frozen river, and your grandmother made your first blanket from it." Alton listened, awed again by how much history lived in their home. Not written in books, but sewn, burned, and felted into everything. Fur for the flesh, felt for the soldier. That day, Alton went with Batu to check on the herds. Snow crunched beneath their fur-lined boots. The wind bit hard, but his layers held strong goatskin on the outside, felt underneath, and wool wraps around his legs. They passed the goat pens. The animals huddled like one breathing mass. Batu checked their legs for ice wounds, cleared the troughs, and salted the feed. "You see," Batu said, "fur keeps the body alive, but it's felt that keeps the soul from shivering. Even the horses wear it." He pointed to the saddle blankets, thick mats of compressed wool that kept the animals' backs warm in battle and travel alike. They rode out a bit farther, towards the western ridge, where the yak herd wandered. From there, Alton could see the smoke trails of other Gareth's distant cousins and clans, each dotting the white expanse like little stars. In the evening, they returned, faces numb and red. Oyentuja had cooked stew goat meat, wild onion, and fermented mare's milk. The Gare was hot with fire, thick with scent, and glowing with life. As they ate, an old man, Uncle Teamer, arrived from the next camp. His beard was silver, and his coat was lined with bear fur, relic from a time when he traveled north and hunted with the Wenki tribes. He brought stories. The hearth of history that night, the fire danced high, and stories poured like tea from Teamer's lips. He spoke of the old days when Chinggis Khan rode with thunder, when whole cities bowed before the steppe, and when the yurts of warriors dotted the world from the Yellow River to the Caspian Sea. We carried our homes on carts, he said, felt homes warm and light. When we stopped, we built them in a day. We slept under the stars and awoke as conquerors. Alton's eyes widened. But it wasn't swords that kept us alive, Teamer continued. It was fire that warmed us, felt that shielded us, and fur that clothed our bones. Never forget, little one, those are the true warriors of the steppe. The wind never leaves weeks past. The snow grew deeper. One night, a storm came roaring from the north, black clouds, screaming winds, and ice that pelted the world like needles. They had to tie down the Gare with rawhide ropes. Tia stuffed extra felt into the walls. Kay tended the fire day and night. Kay didn't leave the yurt for 3 days, but inside it stayed warm. Surin giggled in his cradle. The tea never stopped boiling. The stories never stopped flowing. When the storm passed, Alton stepped outside and looked at their home round, low, humble, and strong. A fortress not made of stone, but of fire, fur, and felt. And he understood something. This wasn't just a shelter. It was a living thing, a vessel of memory, a song against the wind. Years later, when Alton grew older and had children of his own, he taught them the same way how to feed the fire, how to sew the hides, how to roll the felt. His son learned to stack dung just right. His daughter learned the songs sung while stitching boots, and each night as they sat around the hearth, the wind sang outside but never broke through. Felt held the sky, fur held the flesh, fire held the soul, and the steppe, wild, cold, and endless, was home. The pasture speaks in circles, not lines. It teaches without language, and those who listen long enough learn to move like the animals, to pause like the wind, to decide like grass, decide slowly, and always toward survival. In the high valleys, where the grass folds over itself in thick layers, where the soil is deep and dark like an old tale half remembered, lives a shepherd named Moret. She is neither young nor old. Her skin is leathered by sun, her hands calloused with a kind of dignity no education could offer. She does not write, but she knows the land like parchment, and the ink she reads is hoofprint and dung, the fading bloom of clover, the thinning hum of bees. Each morning, Moret wakes before the sun, but after the stars have dimmed. She leaves the door of her wooden hut open as she boils the day's first tea over coals, saved from the night. The scent of smoke mixes with the scent of wool, thick, oily, and faintly sweet. Her sheep are already bleating softly in their pen, restless, as if they too sense the subtle tension that precedes movement. She does not hurt them yet, not immediately. There is a rhythm to pasture that cannot be rushed. Too many shepherds, she believes, move by urgency. They walk the sheep over the same ground until the grass forgets how to return. They read hunger and bleeding and think distance is the answer. But Moret waits. She watches the birds. If the larks return to the field near the western bend, she knows the soil has softened. If the wind carries the scent of mint from the damp hill to the east. Sue knows moisture has gathered. She listens to the logic of the land. That morning, her decision is made when she finds a sprig of oxeye daisy blooming near the salt lick. Not a common bloom this early. That is the sign. The flock will move southward today, across the shallow ridge where the grass rises slowly, like the spine of a sleeping animal. Her flock is small 47 sheep, 5 goats, and 1 dog named Tursa, who does not bark unless truly pressed. She calls them out with a sound made in her throat more than her lips, a low whistle curved upward at the end. They come, not because they are trained, but because they trust her timing. Tursa runs ahead, circling the lead sheep like a slow shadow. The sheep know where they are going before Moret walks. They have done this route many times, though never exactly the same way. That is the essence of pasture rotation. Never the same trail, never the same rhythm, never the same mistakes, twice as they move. Moret drags a long stick through the grass beside her. It is not for walking, it is for remembering. With each rotation, she marks subtle changes in the earth's soft spots, mushroom growth, insect noise, the lean of the grass. These signs are her map. She stores them in her mind like prayer beads, turning them over with each season. Some seasons, there is rain too early and grass too thick with water. The sheep get sick. Other years, drought hardens the roots and nothing grows but thorn. But Moret knows how to compensate. She rotates not just for the grass, but for the soil beneath the grass, and the invisible rules that keep it alive. By noon, the flock has settled on a high stretch of meadow where the wind keeps flies at bay. The sun warms their wool, and they fan out in natural clusters, finding their own space without fuss. Tia, Moret, takes off her boots and wiggles her toes into the earth. She sighs. This is the right place for now. She pulls from her satchel a small tin box filled with hard cheese and roasted barley. Her lunch is modest, but so is her hunger. She eats while watching her sheep move in, figure 8s across the slope. To someone untrained, it might seem random, but Moret knows every loop is a strategy. The older sheep teach the younger ones where to step, what to avoid. The goats, bold and lean, often wander to the edges, chewing bark or climbing small rocks, but always return by evening. Tursa lies beside her, ears twitching. She too watches, though she does not interfere unless Moret rises. This is a job of patience, not intervention. As the sun begins to tip westward, the grass tells another story. The sheep slow their grazing. Their eyes search for water. Moret stands and whistles again, this time with more urgency. She leads them downhill, toward the shaded gully where a spring seeps between stones. This stop was part of the rotation mapped in Moret's mind since late spring, when the moss turned soft on the southern face of the rocks. She does not keep records. Her ledger is the color of roots, the timing of flower heads, the way the sheep cough or walk when the grass changes. She learned this from her grandfather, who learned it from his mother, who had no name. Moret can remember, but is remembered still, every time. She steps on the narrow path beside the split birch dot sometimes. Children from the lowlands visit the mountain pastures. They carry phones and wear clean shoes, and they ask Moret questions she cannot answer with words. Why not build a fence? Why not use GPS collars? Why not keep them in one place? She smiles, but says little. How can she explain that rotation is not only about feeding the sheep, it's about letting the land breathe. The earth cannot give if it is never allowed to rest. Grass dies not only from hooves, but from repetition. Logic in the pasture is circular. You return, but only after you've given something time to forget your last visit. That evening, the flock returns to a different pen, one not used in 3 weeks. The soil beneath it has been scratched clean by chickens in the meantime. The rotation is not just of space, but of purpose. The chickens follow the sheep. The compost follows the chickens. The garden follows the compost. Tina, in cycle, returns. Inside her hut, Moret lays out maps in her mind. She doesn't need paper. Tomorrow, perhaps, they will move toward the southern hollow. Or maybe not. Depends on whether the moss near the ash tree has dried. It depends on how the goats behave. Ati depends on the song of the frogs. That night, as the wind presses gently against the wooden walls, Moret lies awake, not worried, but listening. A distant bleat, a rustle, a silence. Each sound carries weight. She knows every voice in her flock. If one is missing, she will rise. But tonight, they are all here. The pasture has spoken, and the sheep have understood. She smiles. There's no single truth in rotation, only rhythm. And rhythm, once learned, is never forgotten. The wind of the Mongol steppe whistled like a flute through the plains, stirring the long grass and carrying the scent of earth and horse. Inside, a round felt gear nestled against a low hill. Sarnai stirred the A-I-R-A-G. Each morning began this way hand, wrapped in leather, elbow moving in rhythm. The wooden churn rising and falling like a steady heartbeat. Thunk, dash, swish, dash, swish. She had been churning for nearly 20 minutes now. Still the cream refused to break into foam. The mare who had given this milk was young and nervous, and her flavor showed it tangy, almost too sour. But Sarnai knew the rhythm would soften it. The rhythm healed. Outside hooves thundered lightly in the distance. Her husband, Gambold, was herding the mares toward the river bend, where the grass grew sweet. The children were still asleep under marmot fur blankets. The fire inside the gear had dwindled to a red glow, but she could feel its warmth in the floor. Dunt, thunk, dash, swish, dash, thunt, dash, swish. This was not just milk. Life, wealth, pride, and power all in one bubbling, slightly alcoholic drink that had sustained her people for centuries. A woman, the milk Sarnai, was the third daughter of a herdsman and had been churning milk since the age of 7. Her mother had taught her how to recognize the perfect froth, not too thick, not too thin. Her grandmother had shown her how to whisper to the horses as they were milked, "We drink your gift with gratitude." In the Mongol world, men rode and hunted, fought and ruled, but it was the women who stirred the nation's drink. The women who made the milk into magic after the morning churning. Sarnai strained the thick white air rag into a leather sack. The kukarand hung it near the door where the breeze could keep it cool. Guests might arrive at any moment, and a host who offered no air was a host who dishonored her home. Gambold returned before noon, his face red from the wind, a young foal trailing behind his mare. "You've made the good one today," he said, taking a wooden bowl and gulping deeply from the fresh air rag. He wiped his mouth and smiled, beard wet. Sarnai beamed. Praise for her air rag meant everything. Milk, meetings, and memorarag wasn't just for drinking. It was central to every celebration, every agreement, every moment of meaning. When Sarni's sister had married they had filled 5 kukures with arag, enough to serve every guest at the feast. Before the wedding, the bride and groom had washed their hands in it, purification by milk. When Sarnai had given birth to her first child, the midwife had sprinkled arag on the threshold of the gur, offering it to the spirits for protection. Even now, each evening, as the family gathered around the fire, they shared a bowl. Gambold would sip, then pass it to his eldest, then to her. No one kept a bowl for too long. It was passed, like trust. "Every sip reminds me of my mother," Gambold once said, staring into the bowl. "She used to sneak honey into the churn when we were sick, said it made the spirit sweet on us." Sarnai smiled at the memory, then sipped, tasting faint notes of that old Tricani and hope. Guests and generosity. One crisp afternoon, yes, the sound of hooves and a whistle announced a visitor. A rider approached a man draped in sable fur, his boots worn from travel. His name was Chulun, a trader from the east, and he brought gifts, silk threads, a roll of dyed wool, hay, and a small jar of plum preserves. Sarnai welcomed him with a bow and handed him a wooden bowl of arag before any words were spoken. Chulun took it reverently, as was custom. He sipped, smiled, and said, "Ah, you keep your mares happy, I see. It's the churning that makes the difference." She replied with a wink as the men discussed trade horse harnesses for salted fish. Sarnai prepared more bowls, adding a pinch of smoked salt and dried elderflower. This was her special mix, meant to open the throat and warm the chest. Chulun drank 4 bowls and declared he would speak of her arag in Karakoram. That night, after he had left with his cart, Ganbold turned to her and said, "You've made the kind of arag that wins friends without a sword." She blushed under her woolen shawl. The spirits in the bowl there were rules around arag, sacred ones. You never spilled it deliberately. You never raised your voice while churning. You always offered the first ladle to the fire. It was believed that the spirit of the hearth, Galkan, lived in the flame. Sarnai, like her mother before her, would dip a carved wooden spoon into the fresh arag, then flick 3 drops into the fire. The flames would hiss, then settle. If they danced too high, it meant the spirits were displeased. Once, during a long drought, the milk soured no matter how carefully she stirred. The cows were thin, the mares restless. Even the children fell ill. Sarnai had wept beside the kukor, wondering if she had broken a rule. Then she remembered she had forgotten the offering. She lit a fresh fire, knelt, and whispered an apology, dropping arag into the coals. The next morning, the milk churned into a smooth, sweet batch that made her cry with joy. Ganbold didn't ask why. He knew. Seasons of milk in fire summer was the season of abundance. Mares foaled, and milk flowed like rivers. Sarnai and her daughters would milk up to 10 times a day, their fingers skilled, their voices humming lullabies to calm the animals. Arag flowed at festivals, not on weddings, summer births. Men drank and sang songs about eagles and conquest. Women sang about rivers, children, and the earth. Winter was different. The milk dried up. The kukor was put away. In its place, they drank butter tea and gnawed dried curds while waiting for the green shoots to return. But in spring, the first churn of arag was cause for celebration. That year, when the frost melted early, Sarnai invited every neighbor within riding distance to their ger. The fire blazed. She served arag in bowls, carved from elm and birch. The children played outside, their faces sticky with cheese curds and cream. Ganbold played his mooring curd, the horsehead fiddle, and Sarnai danced in her bare feet. Drunk not from the drink, but from the joy it carried. The day of grief and gift, but life on the steppe is never all sunshine. One summer, a terrible sickness struck the herds. 3 of Sarnai's best mares collapsed. The milk turned thin, bitter. Then her youngest child, little Eugen, developed a fever that would not break. She tried honey, tried herbs. She churned arag by night and sprinkled it beneath his pillow, whispering stories into his ears. "Drink, little one, even if you only dream it." He died before the moon turned full. The ger felt cold, even with fire. In mourning, Sarnai stopped churning. Days passed in silence. Ganbold said nothing, but his eyes watched her hands, waiting. Then, one morning, she rose before dawn, washed her face in snow, and walked to the horses. A new mare had given birth. She was strong, calm. Sarnai milked her, brought the bucket back to the ger, and began to churn. Dot, thunk, dash, swish, dash, thunk, dash, swish. The sound echoed softly Like the beginning of a song, when the arag was ready, she poured a bowl, set it near the fire, and flicked 3 drops into the flame. The fire hissed, then glowed blue at its best sign of blessing. Ganbold wept, the legacy of the Bolliers later, when their children had grown and left to build homes of their own. Sarnai remained the queen of the churn. Travelers would stop by not to trade, but to sip her arag and sit in the comfort of her voice. Teach us your mix, Kay young girl once asked her. Sarnai smiled and handed the girl a spoon. You don't learn by tasting, you learn by stirring. So, she taught them the rhythm of the arm, the temperature of the mare, the way to sing as you stir. She showed them how to hang the kukor so it swung with the wind, fermenting faster, how to note if it needed another half hour or just a kind word. And every evening, she still stirred, still offered the first drops to the fire, still passed the bowl to whoever was nearby, because arag was more than drink. It was history in motion. The leather speaks before it creaks. To those who know it, to those who have handled it with steady hands and patient eyes. It hums with quiet fatigue, asking only for touch, for balm, for time. Saddlework is not about shine it, it's about listening. Jaunt rises before the cock crows. In this part of the valley, the light takes its time, sliding down the hills like a spill of milk, caging on dew-wet grasses and cobwebs strung across fence rails. Her boots are already at the foot of the bed, crusted with the memory of yesterday's mud. And the smell of oiled leather lingers in her room like a familiar ghost. She moves through the house in silence. Kettle on the fire, hair in a loose braid. She eats only bread and honey. Tea comes later, after the tools have been warmed and the oil uncapped. Outside, the stable breathes slow. The horses are not yet stirring. Their breath clouds the cool morning, rising from nostrils like incense. The oldest gelding, Wren, nickers low at her approach, not to ask for anything, just to acknowledge her presence. It's like an old friend nodding across a room. John's workshop is a lean-to beside the stable. Half wood, half wind, a canvas flap shields it from the harsher elements, though rain still pools in the corners. Inside, the smells are complex and grounding. Beeswax, lanolin, horsehair, ash soap, and pine resin. Each scent has a function. It tells its own part of the story. She begins with the oldest saddle, the brown one with the split along the stirrup. Strap, not deep, but if left unattended, it will grow a tear, always does. She lays it gently on the padded bench, fingers brushing dust from the seat. The leather is dry in places, cracked in others, but it is not ruined. Nothing is ever ruined if caught in time. The tools are few, but sufficient. A curved awl, bone-handled, cued, a tin of hand-rendered balm, soft from the nearby fire, a horsehair brush, a strip of linen for buffing. She dips her fingers into the balm and works it into the cracks. Not too much, not too fast. Leather takes time to drink. Her hands move slowly, circular motions, thumb pressing along the grain. The saddle begins to darken, not with stain, but with memory. This leather once came from a beast with breath and blood. Now it lives in service of another. That deserves respect. She thinks, not for the first time, how little of the craft is truly about the object. Saddle care is not just about preservations, about rhythm, about being in step with the things you rely on. The horses carry you. The saddle carries your weight. The leather carries the marks of your life, the salt of your sweat, the rub of your thighs, the rain you forgot to shield against. The saddle has seen more of the land than many men. Hills, riverbeds, dry grass plains, wooded gullies. It has borne both joy and fear. To neglect it would be to forget your own path. As she buffs the oil into the cantle, she hums, low-tuned, without words, the kind her mother used to sing while doing laundry or peeling potatoes. Songs that never had a name, but always fit the shape of work. By mid-morning, the saddle gleams not from polish, but from restored softness. It yields under her hand, no longer stiff, no longer dry. It is ready to serve again. She hangs it on its peg and turns to the next, a black training saddle with frayed girth straps. That one will take more time. Joan sharpens the blade she used to trim the worn stitching. Not to sharp it, should slice through thread, not leather. She replaces the strap carefully, matching hole to hole, working through each stitch by hand. Machine stitching is quicker, yes, but it lacks attention. She prefers thread waxed with pine and beeswax, pulled taut with her own fingers. The stitch is stronger when it carries the weight of a person's care. Outside, the stable grows noisier. Hooves stamp, tease. The mare whinnies. The sun stretches long across the fence posts. A neighbor, old Ket, passes on the road with a cart full of hay. He calls out, "You still fussin' with them saddles, girl?" She smiles, but doesn't pause. "Still worth fussin' over," she replies. He laughs, tips his cap, and moves on. He's half blind now, but once rode with her father when they drove cattle through the gorge. He'd know the feel of a bad saddle better than most. By noon, she pauses for tea, strong and dark, sweetened with goat milk. She sits on a rough bench outside the workshop, watching the steam curl up toward the sky. A kestrel rides the thermals high above the field. The dog brand, old and lazy, rests at her feet, twitching in sleep. The third saddle is the one her father used before he lost his strength. She doesn't ride it anymore, but she tends to it just the same. Its surface is worn smooth where his thighs once rested. The horn bears a nick from a deer chase long ago. She presses Baum into the seat and imagines his weight still pressing it down. She talks to him sometimes while she works. It's just nonsense old stories, things he used to say. He always said, "A good saddle makes a good horse better." She didn't believe it then. Now she does. Leather is like memory. Ignored, it hardens, cracks, fails. But if softened, tended to, it remains strong, even beautiful. The fourth saddle is new, stiff, barely broken in. It resists her hands. She oils it anyway, working the surface, coaxing it into submission. The new leather smells sharp and clean, like the inside of a bark shed. It will take time before it stops squeaking and starts singing. Evening falls slowly. Shadows stretch long across the pasture. The horses have been turned out. The golden light makes their coats shimmer like silk. Jaunt gathers her tools, wipes them clean, and places them in their drawer with care. She doesn't rush the end of day. There's a lastness to it she respects. Before she leaves, she walks the row of saddles, running her fingers across each one as if blessing them. Each saddle is a life, she thinks. Each one has carried weight, not just of bodies, but of days, of distances, of weather and work. They are not just tools, okay? And the work of caring for them, this soft work, done in quiet, keeps the whole story alive. She closes the flap of the workshop, latches the door, and walks back toward the house. As the first stars emerge, the smell of oiled leather clings to her clothes. She doesn't mind. It is the scent of something trusted, something earned in the dark. The saddles rest, soft again, ready again. The hearth was the heart of the house, and Elise, wrapped in layers of faded wool in memory, was its keeper. She sat beside the crackling fire like she had every evening for more than 60 winters. Her hands, knotted with age, and the ache of labor, rested in her lap. The kettle hissed softly, warming rainwater drawn from the stone well that morning. Smoke curled upward from the wood oak and ash, mostly blending with the scent of tea, old herbs, and soot. In this quiet warmth, stories rose. Stories that no one wrote down, stories that lived only in breath, in pauses between sips, in the flicker of firelight across a face. Elise did not need parchment. She had the hearth. And children with wide eyes a ritual older than words. Every evening, as dusk fell and the wind leaned against the shutters like an old friend begging entry, her grandchildren would gather at her feet. Little Jules, curious and quick with questions, Marianne, sweet and serious, and baby Paul, too young to remember the words, but old enough to feel their shape. They came not for toys, not for sweets, but for the hush that settled when the room dimmed and the fire became the only light in the world. That hush where magic lived, where time bent its spine and leaned close to listen. Elise would sip from her old tin mug, breathe in the steam, then begin not with grand declarations, but with small, familiar words. Once, when the river still sang, ... double quotes, or long before even your papa was born, she told stories of washerwomen who outwitted soldiers, of mothers who sewed messages into seams, of wolves who weren't so wicked, and princes who didn't know how to cook. But the best ones were not fables. They were fragments of her own life, smoke and memory there. It's the story of the winter the bread froze before it finished baking. She had been 15, her mother sick with fever, her father gone to chop firewood. A hearth had burned low, nearly out. Elise had torn a piece of her own shawl to feed the flames. I burned warmth to create more, she told Jules, who frowned in confusion. Isn't that like eating your own food to get full? Exactly, she smiled, and sometimes it works. Or the tale of her sister, Colette, who once danced with a traveling violinist in the village square and vanished the next morning, leaving only her scarf and a song behind. She followed the music, Elise would say wistfully. Kay, and I stayed to listen to the silence. Did you miss her? Kay, Marianne would whisper. Every time the wind whistles through the trees, I wonder if it's her playing the violin again. Why fire is the best listener. There was something about the fire. It didn't interrupt. It didn't forget. It crackled at the right moments, softened the edges of pain, and its smoke thin and blue seemed to carry the words up into the rafters, where the spirits of the old ones might lean down to hear. Elise believed this deeply. She always started her stories with a gesture, tossing a pinch of lavender into the flames. For the ones who listened from beyond, she'd murmur. The children never asked who the ones were. They only looked up, briefly, as if they too might catch a whisper on the smoke. The story she never told in Tilda was one story Lisa never told. Not for years. Not even when her oldest granddaughter married and moved to the city. Not when her son's hair turned gray. It was the story of Henry. He was a blacksmith's son, broad-shouldered and always dusted with ash. He had a crooked tooth and sang like someone who didn't know sorrow. They'd met during the war, the first one, the war that took more than it gave. Henry had carried firewood to her doorstep when her father was conscripted. He stayed for supper one night, then another. Then he stayed for years, until he did, in single quotes, to one letter. That's all he left. The village cannot hold me anymore. But I carry your warmth like a coal in my coat pocket. If I survive, I will. Return, he never did. Elise waited. Every market day, she wore the blue ribbon he gave her. Every harvest festival, she baked his favorite tart. Every fire she lit with him in mind. And for decades, she never spoke his name aloud. Not until one windy evening, long after the children had grown, and Marianne came back home with her own child Louise. Louise had shy eyes and a quiet way of holding a spoon, just like Henry. That night, as the fire burned low, Elise looked at her family, gathered close, and said, "Let me tell you a story I've never told before." A silence worth breaking the room went still. Even the kettle seemed to pause mid-bubble. She spoke slowly, her voice lined with smoke and age, about Henry's laughter, his rough hands, the kiss they shared beneath the storm-gray sky, the letter, and the never return. Marianne cried. Jules held her hand. Little Louise, unaware of the full weight, leaned her head on Elise's knee. When she finished, there was no applause, no reply. Only the fire, whispering something soft, like it had been waiting for years to hear the story too. I kept it. In the smoke, Elise said. But sometimes, smoke needs to rise. It's the hearth, as history in old houses like theirs. Books were rare. Clocks ticked loud enough to be feared. Paper rotted in damp corners. But the hearth endured. That little circle of warmth gave shape to a people who had nothing else to pass down but memory. It was around the fire that family trees grew roots, and Elise's stories told in a cracked voice with trembling hands became the map by which her family remembered who they were. The final fire in the spring of her 87th year, Lisa fell ill. Not with anything dramatic, just the slow unraveling of a thread pulled gently by time. Her final nights were spent in her bed beside the hearth. The fire was kept small, more ember than flame. Still, her eyes followed the smoke. On her last evening, the children gathered. Again Marianne, now gray herself, Jules a father, Louise, a young woman with her own stories. They didn't ask her to speak. They just sat, quiet, letting the fire fill the silence. Then Elise smiled faintly and whispered, "Tell me a story." And they did. Marianne spoke of the day she learned to bake. Jules recalled the night the wolf came near the chicken coop. Louise described the dream she had of a boy with a crooked tooth. Each story fell into the smoke like petals, and Elise, wrapped in warmth and memory, closed her eyes. After the smoke, they buried her near the orchard, where the roots grew deep. The hearth went cold for a time, out of respect. But one night, Louise returned. She cleaned the ashes, laid fresh wood, and struck a match. She sipped tea and whispered, "Once, when the river still sang." And so the stories continued, passed not by pen, but by smoke and silence and the fire between generations. The wind has no master on the steppe. It travels where it wills, drapes itself over hills, threads through the manes of horses, and hums across the felted roofs of yurts. But those who herd with the wind, those who ride alongside it, breathe with it, and rest only when it does know its language. Not in words, but in rhythm. Erdene wakes with the wind. Always has. It's not an alarm, not a demand, it's an invitation. A call that rustles through the canvas of the yurt and gently fingers the horsehair ropes, holding the door flap shut. He swings his legs from the bedding of wool and hides and steps onto the packed earth. No shoes yet. He needs to feel the morning first. The sky is pale, but not yet gold. Distant stars linger faintly behind wisps of cloud, and the smell of smoke from last night's fire clings to his tunic. Outside, his herd is scattered across the lower slope, dark dots moving slowly through pale grass, kissed by frost. They are .com. That's good. .com. Horses in the morning mean a quiet day at least to begin with. Dean boils tea. Not because he's thirsty, but because it centers him. Milk tea, salted and thick, bubbling low in the iron pot. He watches the fire curl upward like a horse's breath in winter. Each morning begins with slowness. The ride will be long, but the spirit must be still by the time the sun crests. Eastern Ridge, his horse is ready. Kesar is a gray stallion, not young, not old, but full of knowing. He doesn't need to be pulled, only pointed. Erdene saddles him with care, every strap checked, every buckle secure. The saddle blanket worn, smooth by seasons of sweat and motion, bears the shape of both man and beast. The herd today is spread wider than usual. That means they've moved more in the night, possibly wind shifted, possibly spooked. Dean scans the horizon. No wolves, no strangers, just wind again, moving east to west than usual, but not alarming. He mounts. Kesar walks first, not galloping. not trotting. They descend into the shallow basin where the bulk of the herd grazes. Over 100 heads, mares with foals, colts in training, geldings steady as stone. They move like water when you don't rush them, a flowing, living river of muscle and breath. Erdine whistles low and steady, his signature call. The lead mare lifts her head, a moment of stillness, then motion. Not panic, dash response. He rides wide, always at the edges. Rider must not push, he must suggest. The trick is knowing when to ride close and when to stay away. The horses know the rhythm of the land better than any man. They'll find the best forage if you let them. The steppe opens like a great palm before them. No fences, no roads, it's just undulating land, bruised with rock outcrops and shallow streams. The sky above stretches endlessly, wrapped in the light blue of distance. Clouds move like sails, and the wind plays along the ridge lines like a bowed instrument. By midday, the sun is high and warm, and the herd settles into a loose graze along a slope with good view in all directions. Erdine dismounts, lets Kassar drink from the stream, and chews on dried meat softened in hot tea. He watches the horses. He always watches. It's a limp in the hind leg, a foal straying too far. The tail flicking too often. Each gesture tells a story. This is not glamorous work. It is quiet, repetitive, demanding in its patience. But in this stillness lies something rare, a deep, unspoken connection between land, sky, horse, and man. The steppe is not forgiving. If you rush, it reminds you. If you forget the rhythm, the herd breaks apart. If you force the wind, it leaves you behind. In the afternoon, the herd needs to move again. The grass is cropped too short on the slope. He rides out and calls the lead mare again. This time, a sharper whistle, followed by a heel tap against Kassar's flank. The stallion responds instantly, weaving down the edge of the herd, guiding it in a broad arc. Dust lifts in soft clouds behind them, lit golden by slanting sunlight. A hawk screams overhead. Erdine glances up, squinting. That's a good sign. Hawks follow motion and scent. They sense balance. He believes in signs, not superstitions, observations sharpened by years of repetition. A herder who doesn't read the wind or watch the birds is like a rider who closes his eyes as the herd reaches a fresh patch of open grassland. The pace slows. Horses fan out, some lowering their heads to graze, others standing watch. Young colts buck at each other in mock battle, testing joints and courage. The foals stay close to mothers. Erdine dismounts again and kneels to touch the grass, soft, still green at its base, holding moisture. This will serve until dusk. He drinks from his water skin and pulls from his satchel a curved knife and a small leather pouch. Inside is beeswax and tallow mixed with herbs. He kneels beside Kassar and checks his hooves. The front left is gathering stones again. Pries them free, checks for bruising, then rubs the balm into the frog of the hoof. Kassar leans slightly into the care, not submission, trust. Later, as the sun begins its long descent, the wind changes again, cooler now, coming from the north. That means colder nights ahead. Time to bring the herd in closer. Erdine whistles again, 3 short bursts, and rides the outer edge, slowly turning the herd back toward their temporary corral. He doesn't build fences. He doesn't believe in penning the steppe. Instead, he uses rope lines and earth banks, the memory of previous days, grazing in the natural limits of terrain. The horses settle as twilight falls. Tails swish slower. Heads droop. The foals lie down. Erdine unsaddles Kassar and rubs him down with a coarse cloth, then lets him graze close by. He gathers a ring of dried dung, lights his fire, and boils tea again. The stars appear sharp and clean in the cooling sky. Orion rises first, then the Pleiades. He hums an old song under his breath, something his grandmother sang when the wolves howled far off. He does not feel lonely. Step is never empty. Its silence is full of motion, of echoes, of memory. Every hoofbeat on the soil leaves a trace not just on the land, but in the rhythm of the rider's heart. He lies beside the embers with a saddle for a pillow. Kaza stands nearby, dozing. The herd breathes in waves. The wind hums its endless lullaby. Erdn closes his eyes, wrapped in the great, unbroken rhythm of horse and sky. The wind had a voice on the steppe. It spoke in whistles through the tall grass, in howls around the mountains, and in murmurs that slipped between the fingers of the weavers. But no one heard it quite like Sarian, a 17-year-old girl who had learned to read the wind, not with her ears, but with her hands. Her hands were stained with lanolin and hardened by wool. This spring, for the first time, Sarian had been chosen to lead the building of a new gear, a circular tent home for her cousin's wedding. It was a task not lightly given. A gear was not merely a shelter. It was spirit, memory, flesh, and felt, and its heart began with wool. Wool is the soul of the steppe. The sun rose early that morning, and Sarian woke with it. She tied her long black hair into a braid, threw a strip of yak butter into her tea, and walked barefoot out of the felt-covered gear where her family lived. Their sheep waited in a tight cluster. In spring, the shearing began with a steady rhythm. Her mother clipped the wool from their bodies, murmuring prayers to keep the sheep calm. Sarian followed, gathering each fleece into a woven sack, careful not to let the dirty edges mix with the soft belly fluff. The wool must not be angry, her mother always said. Wool held memory. It remembered rough hands, neglect, or haste. And if it remembered wrong, it would twist during felting crack, resist, tear. Sarian took the raw wool to a clearing near the stream, where she and her aunt began to clean it with snowmelt water. They pressed, rinsed, pressed again, letting the dirt bleed into the earth. Smoke rose from their breath, but their fingers stayed warm from motion. By mid-afternoon, their palms were numb, and the wool lay like clouds on the flat rocks, ready for beating. The beating grounds. This was the part that made outsiders laugh. Women with sticks, lacking bundles of wool as if they were enemies. But the beating of the wool was sacred. Sarian took a willow rod and began pounding. Slowly, at first, then faster. With each strike, the fibers opened, loosened, and breathed. The rhythm became a song. Aunt Naran sang softly. Wool of the east wind, lay flat, lie still, wrap the soul, bend to the will. They sang not for entertainment, but to guide the motion, lining, merging, preparing to become more than themselves. By sunset, the beaten wool was ready to become felt. Felt, the skin of the gerfelt, was not woven. It was born. Sarian and the women laid the fluffed wool on a reed mat in thick, overlapping layers, creamy white with just a trace of brown from the mountain sheep. They sprinkled boiling water across it, then began rolling the mat tightly into a bundle as wide as a man's arm and as long as her height. Then came the treading. They tied the roll to a young horse's saddle, and Sarian rode it in circles around the pasture. The heat, the pressure, the moisture, all these awakened the wool into something new. After nearly an hour of riding, they unrolled it. Felt, dense, warm, whisper soft on the fingers, yet strong enough to block the wind that scraped the earth. Bare in winter, Sarian ran her hand over it and smiled. A tweeled sound. The kind you could trust at wood, bone, and circle the gear was not only felt. It needed bones, the wooden lattice of the wall, the central columns that held the dome, and the crown, the tunnel, where smoke escaped and stars peeked in. The men worked on the wood, but it was the women who covered it, gave it its soul. Sarian stitched felt panels together, using gut thread. crisscrossing the seams like an old scar. The pieces wrapped around the circular frame with the precision of muscle-hugging bone. There was no straight line in the gear. Everything curved. Everything breathed. She tied the felt panels with ropes of braided horsehair. Weathered height and song dashed strong. Then came the door. They painted it red. Red to keep away evil. Red for joy. Her cousin's initials were burned into the lintel above the frame. Sarian kissed her fingers and touched them to the wood. Inside the circle, when the gear was finished, they lit the first fire inside it, a small one, just dung and dry grass to begin. The smoke spiraled upward and slipped out through the crown, a sign of good luck. The inside of the gear felt alive. The walls were soft, breathing. The floor was lined with furs, the ceiling like the inside of a womb, warm, rounded, and safe. It was a world apart from the howling wind, just steps outside. Sarian watched as her cousin and new husband entered barefoot. They circled the hearth 3 times, then knelt and touched their foreheads to the floor. A bowl of milk tea was passed. Laughter came easily. This was the power of a gear. A house made of sheep and horse, of woman and man, of wind and hand. No nails, no bricks. Just memory stitched into cloth. The whisper no one hears at night. When the celebration had faded, and only coals glowed at the center of the home, Sarian sat alone by the gear she had helped birth. She placed her palm on its side on the felt she had rolled, beaten, stitched, and she listened. The felt whispered, not in words, but in the soft warmth of memory, in the hum of the fibers, in the way it had held shape despite all odds, like her grandmother had, like her mother still did. She thought of her future, of the day she would build her own gear, of the day she would teach her daughter to listen for the same whisper. The next morning, by sunrise, the wind had changed again. The horses grazed quietly, and the new couple still slept inside their gear, wrapped in their own circle of felt, fire, and future. Sarian walked to the stream, washed her hands, and looked back at the camp. Gers. Dotted. The landscape, like white stones on the grass. They looked simple, but she knew every one of them carried a storm of stories. Every one of them had been shaped by hands, hardened by sun, and softened by songs. They were more than tents. They were ancestors you could step inside. Epilogue years Latercerin. Now, an old woman with silvered hair sat at the edge of her own gyre, watching her granddaughter beat wool near the stream. The same song rose on the air, wool of the east wind, and the rhythm echoed back in the land. The circle was unbroken. The felt still whispered, and the wind, that ancient guest, still leaned in to listen. Thank you for resting here a while, for stepping into the quiet world of soot-darkened pots, morning fires, and the quiet care of a cook who stirred more than just soup. If your eyes feel heavier now, it's only the calm weight of time wrapping gently around you. May your night be as steady and comforting as the rhythm of a spoon on iron, soft and unhurried. If you'd like to hear more stories like this, you're warmly welcome to subscribe only. If it feels right, and if you're still awake, feel free to whisper where you're listening from, or just say goodnight below. For now, sleep well and let the past keep you company a little longer.